Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Omar. I'm a PhD student from the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London. And today I'll be presenting you my research on a machine learning assisted preliminary design methodology for repetitive design features in complex structures. Now that's quite a mouthful of a title. So what I want to do first is break down what I mean, what the problem is, before I move on to how I address that problem. So with regards to the problem, I'm going to break down what I mean by complex structures, how these complex structures are currently designed at the preliminary design stage, and how machine learning has been used and can be used to improve this design methodology. And then I'll discuss my approach to improving the preliminary design process with machine learning. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is that the preliminary design process of repetitive design features in complex structures is still too slow, repetitive, and expert dependent. So what do I mean by complex structures? What do I mean by repetitive design features? And what is the preliminary design process? Well, let's start with what I mean by complex structures. In this investigation, I regard complex structures as complex in material behavior. Such structures are due to them being made out of composite materials. This is a relatively modern way of creating structures, and a composite material can be defined as a combination of a matrix and reinforcement combined to obtain superior properties to those of the individual components. Typically, the reinforcement might be a carbon fiber or glass fiber. And then this is combined with a matrix, a thermoset or thermoplastic plastic matrix, such as epoxy. So a common system would be carbon fiber epoxy composite, which is currently used in about 50% of material in aerospace and airframes. In current Boeing and Airbus designs. So the reason that they're so popular is because of their improved material properties. So they can combine high strength with low weight, which means that when you're flying in the sky or in other applications such as in automotive, you can save on fuel costs, which helps target emissions criteria. However, their behavior is quite complex. This is because they exhibit multi-scale behavior. By multi-scale, I mean that the behavior at the macro scale, the mesoscale, and the microscale are all interlinked and affect each other greatly. Before I go on to that, though, just to give you examples of what composite structures are used for, they can be used for wings, as you can see here, or they can be used in automotive in F1, or they can be used in bridges, as in this concept design by the Composite Center in the UK. And yeah, when you're designing these, they might have multiple design features, such as fillets, such as fastenings, such as bolts, or ply drops, where you terminate ply regions. And to give you a bit more understanding of how composite materials are made, normally it's a layup of different ply angles stacked on top of each other to develop a laminate whose properties depend on the sequence of ply angles. Okay, and how are such structures currently designed at the preliminary design stage? Well, you can see here this design workflow for airframe design. Typically, what you'll do is you'll have a global model, which is using very low fidelity finite element modeling methods, such as coarse shells, and these drive progressively higher fidelity submodels around areas of interest. These higher fidelity submodels take a long time to run, which is why we limit it to only zooming in on the areas of interest. And typically what we're looking for is whether damage initiates at the preliminary design stage under limit loading. But the issue is that, as you can imagine, there are so many design features, so many fasteners on an airframe, hundreds of thousands or millions, and other design features such as ply drops or fillets, and they all have to be analyzed to check whether damage will initiate. And this can be very slow and repetitive and requires expertise. Machine learning can address these challenges because the aim of machine learning is to use expert gathered data to inform faster predictions. Machine learning has been used to single scale analyses, such as at the micro scale, where you're looking at the fiber matrix interactions, and at the macro scale, where you're looking at general structural changes. And it has also been applied to univariate analyses, which is, so you're either varying just the material layup, or just the boundary conditions, or just the structural geometry parameters. And it's also been used at multi-scale, linking, for example, macro scale, structural scale, to the meso-ply level scale. However, it has not been extensively applied to the macro-meso scale, which is pertinent to the current local design methodology. This global local design methodology requires to vary laminate stacking sequence, the design feature parameters, and the boundary conditions simultaneously. And so machine learning has yet to be exploited for this, which is where this research comes in. The solution is a machine learning assisted preliminary design methodology, which I demonstrate on a hole in C-SPA case study. So to give you an overview before I delve into the details, on the left, you can see my envisioned workflow for the designer. And on the right, you can see the proof of concept I developed in this work. The envisioned workflow for the designer would focus on the designer generating a global shell model of the structure. In this case, for example, you can see a wing has been modeled. And then they would query at the locations of interest, at the high stress concentration areas, into the local high fidelity feature models by using a machine learning model, instead of running it through long and time expensive finite element simulations. This can then be used to re-optimize the design by changing the geometry parameters, the feature design parameters of the local design feature, to result in an optimized low weight design. And the proof of concept that I developed for this is to zoom in on a C-SPA and look at the detailed three-dimensional through thickness stresses of holes and plates. So typically, the global model won't have the explicit local design feature on the global model. So therefore, we zoom into this global model to understand the behavior of the local model. The challenge of this is that we have a lot of variables, laminate stacking sequence, boundary conditions, and the whole diameter. And we want to limit the dimensionality of this problem to limit the amount of training data we need to train our machine learning model. And we do this, we address this challenge using these 4 key algorithms that I describe here, and I'll describe now. So the first key thing that we do is we use an improved design of experiment relevant to such complex material behavior. Typically, a composite laminate, or the composite laminates that I investigate in this study, are made out of 0-degree plies, 45-degree plies, -45-degree plies, and 90-degree plies. These are stacked in various combinations to generate a laminate with custom stiffness and strength properties. So the number of plies in each direction influences the stiffness, which is key in understanding the stresses in the local design feature. Another key parameter is the hole diameter. Therefore, we have 4 or 5 parameters which we need to vary in the design of experiment. To make this a dimensionless, to reduce the dimensionality of this problem, we use Latin hypercube sampling, which means that I can say to the model that I want to generate 100 samples, for example, and it will split out the appropriate well-distributed samples within the design space. We further use composite design rules, such as the 10% rule, which limits, which ensures that the percentage of plies in any direction has to be more than 10%. for a well-designed laminate. So we use such design rules to filter out areas of the design space which are not feasible. Therefore, we have a well-distributed set of training samples. The other feature that we haven't mentioned is the boundary conditions. That is another feature which has to be varied to understand the behavior of laminates under various loadings. To do this, what we first do is we generate an intermediate mesh to capture the behavior of the local mesh along the boundary of the local design feature. This has a higher mesh density than the global mesh, and this allows us to pick up the detailed displacement variations along the boundary. To reduce the number of the dimensions of this problem, we then used a bilinear homogenization to result in an equivalent work done to the local model by ensuring that the distances within only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boundary nodal displacements are varied to result in the same stresses in the middle. Therefore, we only need to focus on these 8 nodal displacements in the 3 direct nodal degrees of freedom. Therefore, we have drastically reduced the dimension of our problem. Then we use the concept of non-local stress analysis. What we do is we load the intermediate model, as you can see here, with a unit displacement in each direction. And then we observe the stress response in the high fidelity 3-dimensional model. Using the principle of linear superposition, that means that the stress response in this local model, given an arbitrary boundary condition, is the same as linearly superimposing the stress responses due to the boundary conditions applied independently. So we apply these independent boundary conditions, independently applied unit boundary conditions, and we monitor the stresses around the design feature, in this case, the hole. What we then do is we get a volume average stress per ply over a characteristic distance. This allows us to have a vector of describing the stresses in each of the 6 stress variants along the for each ply near to the feature of interest. Now we have essentially for each training sample point, the finite element model would output a vector, a sequence of stresses for each ply. This is our output. Our input is the laminate stacking sequence. So we have a sequence-to-sequence problem, which we can address using long short-term memory neural networks. These neural networks are designed for such issues, and we can use these to predict the stress vectors through the thickness. The results of this case study show, for example, when running the machine learning model to predict the stresses through thickness around the circumference of the hole, you can see that we have a pretty high accuracy, reaching around 94%, which should be satisfactory for preliminary design stage when you can do multiple optimizations based upon this. And the main observation as well is they can achieve this high accuracy with at least a 15 times time saving. To give you a frame of reference, running a finite element model takes about 30 minutes for this high fidelity local model, but running it through the machine learning model equivalent takes about a couple of minutes. If you factor in the consideration that it takes even more time to generate this local fidelity model, it means that, which we don't need to do in the machine learning model, means that we should be achieving even more of a time saving. So yeah, what I've demonstrated is a very initial proof of concept for a rapid design tool, which can be used to faster predict the failure and therefore faster optimize a large structure with repetitive design features. This is key, at least in the aerospace industry, for example, such a tool to enable us to rapidly reduce the development cycle for airframe structures. So that means we can design planes faster and change the designs of planes faster, as we need to do to meet our net zero emissions flight target by 2050. A lot of ambitious aircraft design needs to be done, and to allow validation certification, we need to design these quickly and iterate through products quickly. But they can also be used for any products which you have repetitive design features, which can be automated and whose failure can be automated, predicted, whose failure can be predicted much quicker. And in future, this work will be extended to for further complex structures and design features. Thank you for listening. That was my presentation.